You're listening to Parasearch Radio, news, views and reviews from the world of the paranormal from across the UK and beyond. Find us on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web. Parasearch UK Radio. Parasearch Radio, broadcasting to the UK and beyond.
The views and opinions expressed by presenters and guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Parasearch Radio or its affiliates and sponsors. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Haunted Histories with your host Penny G. Morgan, right here on Parasearch Radio.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second 2018 episode of Haunted Histories. You know who I am, but if you don't, where have you been? It tells you in the introduction what my name is. It's Penny, your dedicated host of the ghost, and all things history related, but that doesn't quite rhyme, so sort of take that as a given. We've got some, well, quite amazing shows coming up for you on Parasearch this year. And I'm especially excited about some of the guests I have coming on Haunted Histories, both new and for repeat visits. And I do include my guest tonight in that, Mr. Bill Tabone, who we'll be with shortly. But before we go any further, happy birthday to Mr. Fright Nights, Mr. Mark Hughes. He normally listens to the show, so if he isn't tonight, it's probably because he's out celebrating his 21st again. Well, he'll catch up. Another thing I want to plug, possibly because one of the team may be one of those guests I was talking about, one of the newbies to the show, is that the new Tennessee Wraith Chaser series, Haunted Towns, is finally being shown in the UK. You might remember those good old southern boys from Ghost Asylum? Well, Quest Red, Thursday nights, 10 p.m. Second episode is this week, and I believe it's on Salem. So, if you like them in Ghost Asylum, and you got a thing about that Southern American accent and those lovely boys in the TWC, go and give it a check out. Well, plugs aside, I didn't even tell you which one of them might be on the show, did I? You have to keep guessing. So, tonight, well, my guest is our friendly Australian. Well, technically one of our friendly Australians. We have a few tame Aussies who come on the show who, well, we love you to pieces. But it's Bill Tabone of the Australian Paranormal Society. And we're going to be talking about somewhere near Melbourne called Fort Nepean, which has quite an amazing claim to fame. You'll have to listen to find out what, but it's quite amazing. I thought that paying respect to the Australian forces who fought alongside the Brits in World War I, because of that we should look at Gallipoli for a quick history lesson. Now, who has ever wondered, who's not Australian, any of you Aussies listening, I'm hoping you'll know the answer to this, what Anzac Day was all about and why it's commemorated on the 25th of April when the Poppy Day is commemorated on, the 11th of November, so the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, i.e. when the guns fell silent. Well, in 1915, on the 25th of April, Australian and New Zealand troops formed a large part of an Allied attack on the peninsula of Gallipoli in Turkey. The aim was to open up the Dardanelles Straits, which were heavily mined and protected, to Allied ships so that they could get through and capture Constantinople, which we all know now as Istanbul. They could then link up with Russia. And it was a mission conceived by the First Lord of the Admiralty, a little known dude by the name of Winston Churchill. You heard of him? Yeah? Maybe? I think he did something a few years later that was quite important, but no, maybe. Or is he the dog, the insurance dog? Yes, if anyone says anything on the chat page, I am being sarcastic. Of course, I know who Winston Churchill was. But anyway, let's get back to the serious history bit. Shall we say in a nutshell that it wasn't the best idea that Churchill had ever had, and that the Turkish opposition was so well dug in and fortified on the higher ground that their capacity was so much greater than the Allied forces that there was no way this was going to end well. If you look into it and the type of land that the Allied forces were having to fight on, it was an impossibility. And it was one of those similar things that actually happened in World War II on occasion as well, where intelligence just hadn't been very intelligent. Something in the region of 58,000 Allied soldiers lost their lives in Gallipoli, including around 11,000 Australians and New Zealanders. It's also believed that around 300,000 on both sides, both Allied and Turkish sides, were seriously wounded or had to be taken off. Now, it's believed that this almighty cock-up was actually what hastened Asquith's demise as Prime Minister and heralded his replacement by David Lloyd George, who could ironically be compared to the impact that Churchill had when he came into power during the early stages of World War II after Chamberlain. Digressing slightly, there was a very interesting programme on that I caught recently. Dan Snow, the historian, was looking at the life and times of Lloyd George because I believe he is some distant relative of him. And although Lloyd George was not the nicest of people, he was most definitely a war Prime Minister. And it is quite an interesting story to read that everyone espouses Churchill as being the war Prime Minister, but Lloyd George, when you look into some of the things he did, he could be seen as being one of the people that quickened World War One as well. Wondered what would have happened if Asquith had stayed in power. But why was Gallipoli so horrific? Well, the Allied forces didn't withdraw until January 1916. Bear in mind they'd been there since the April of 1915, and for those 9 months they had to put up with flies on everything. Any of us who've been to the Mediterranean type countries, we know what it's like there. It can get very hot, and when it's hot, you have flies. There were putrefying bodies in no man's land that no one could bury. Why? Well, both sides had bodies in no man's land. There were snipers on both sides. You went in there to try and take bodies out, you ran the risk of becoming one yourself. And those bodies, they weren't only an offence to the olfactory system, but also a breeding ground for these flies that covered food, and you couldn't eat without knowing you were going to be eating some of them. But flies also spread disease and sickness, and many of the men who were being evacuated from the peninsula due to something, as we would probably say, simple now, although we all know it's a killer, dysentery. In fact, when I was researching for this bit on Gallipoli, I found an account from a British NCO, William Davies, who said that even, and I'm paraphrasing here, that even if you needed the toilet, or latrine as they called it, you tried not to use it as they were a target for shells, as the Turks knew the troops would have to visit them. Ugh. You may think that was nothing compared to what the men in the French trenches were suffering from. Not so. This was also trench warfare, and with weather conditions that could go from blisteringly hot to cold and wet, many troops suffered with trench foot, frostbite, and even collapsing trenches during torrential rain. There was probably only one person victorious in all of this, a chap by the name of Mustafa Kemal, a 33-year-old Turkish lieutenant colonel who commanded the 19th Turkish Division. He's probably better known as Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who became the founding father of the Turkish Republic in 1923. Now, with an estimated 8,000 Australians not returning from being sent there, it had a massive impact on the country. And whilst it was not the biggest bloodbath of the First World War for Australia, Fromelles saw over 5,500 Australians killed in just the first 24 hours. It would have certainly been a shock to the country, as it was the first initiative of the war that they had really been part of. These figures I'm going to come up with, though, may put the losses to Australia during World War One into more context. Because when you look at the thousands that were killed in the Somme and everything else, they don't seem that high, do they? Well, according to historian Geoffrey Gray in his book A Military History of Australia, the casualty rate, if you take it as a percentage of all forces committed, was 65%, one of the highest rates of all British Empire forces. And the total cost of World War One to Australia, according to the Australian War Memorial, was over £188 million. Quite an impact. And on that note, shall we talk to Bill? 1 second.
Hello, Harry Price here. Good evening. If there's nothing myself and everybody else enjoy here on the other side more is the sit back and relax and listen to Parasearch Radio with its paranormal news, views and reviews from across the UK and beyond. Make sure to find out more about them on Facebook, Twitter and the World Wide Web, whatever they are, to keep up to date with all their broadcasts throughout the week. And I hope you enjoy them as much as we do over here. Hello? Is anybody there?
Right, and we're now joined by our friend Bill Tabone from all the way over in Australia. And as normal when I interview Bill, because of the 10-11 hour time difference, it's late morning where he is and, well, very early morning, late night where I am. But it's always a pleasure to talk to Bill, and you know, we did have to say shh to each other a few minutes before we went live just now because we were giggling. But anyway, Mr. Tabone, how are you?
Very good, Miss Penny. How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. Did you have a good Christmas and New Year?
Very good with the family, nice and quiet, and got to spend time with all the kids and family, and that was really nice. Yeah, and yourself?
Very good, thank you. Bit of the same, really. Father Christmas landed a load of presents here, so my two, well, they got up at 1 o'clock in the morning was the first one, and my 8-year-old was just sitting on the sofa staring at his presents with a big grin on his face. So, did Santa make it to Melbourne as well on time?
He certainly did, matey, and I think he must have unloaded half his presents here, I reckon.
That's a big old sleigh he had. Big old sleigh.
It must be huge.
So, how's things with you on a ghost hunting front?
Yeah, really good. We're sort of we've got a few things in the works. We've got a few meetings to go to this week to get some new sites organised and to run some more tours and things like that to get a bit of education out there for people. Mm-hmm. Busy, a lot of planning with the group and with our partners in crime, mm-hmm. Just trying to keep everything in order. So the start of the year, January is my sort of month off, but it doesn't tend to be a month off. It tends to be a month of planning. So we tend to organise meetings and things that we can't get to, and then into it. Yeah, so doing well.
So these new places, are they quite local to Melbourne, or are they a bit of a drive?
Well, one of them's probably about 3-hour drive, but that's I mean, for us that's
that's still Victoria though, isn't it?
Still Victoria, yeah. I mean, it's just up past. There's one place up past the asylum that I do some work at. Would that be
Arradale we're talking about?
Arradale, yes, yeah. Arradale, sorry. Yes, yep, which you know about.
I do.
And we're heading out that way, well, I'm heading out that way next Saturday to have a chat to the owner there and at this place, and we'll see how we go. I'll give you more details when I've got some details locked down.
Definitely do keep us posted. So how is Arradale? Is it still doing okay? It's not sort of decayed anymore, or?
No, it's awesome. It's a great old place. It is, obviously it's aging as it goes, but the atmosphere of that place is just fantastic, and we can't get enough of it. We're sort of it becomes very addictive, that place. You always find something new, which is really cool.
Well, I must admit, when we did the revisit show last week, and Kerry, the station owner, Parasearch station owner, and she does her own shows as well. I mean, she's interviewed our mutual friend Sarah Chimachero on a few occasions. She was saying Arradale was one of her favourite episodes because it was somewhere she'd never even heard of. And after she listened to the show, apart from the fact she likes the Australian accent, so I was assuring then getting yourself on. But it's somewhere that the amount of activity that we were discussing is somewhere that's now on her bucket list. I must admit, it's on mine as well. But it does seem and it was actually something we were getting into a debate about that. I know that, and I heard this from someone who knows Ian Lawman, that he was genuinely terrified when he was the medium there for Haunted Australia. And when you think Ian Lawman's a bare-knuckle boxer, not a lot scares him. Yeah. But I was saying, and you might be able to answer this actually, Bill, is the spirits there, are they genuinely nasty? Or because most of them would have had quite severe mental health problems when they were in there, it's just their mental health problems that are making them appear scary because they don't necessarily converse in a normal way.
That's true, and that's what people got to understand is, when someone passes, if their spirits, still around, they don't automatically grow wings and become angels. Their personality is the same. So it takes time I believe it takes time when you cross over for you to heal. And if they haven't crossed over, they're going to be stuck with these psychological impairments.
The ailment that they had before they died. Yeah,
for sure. So for me, it's part of that. There are some spirits there that aren't nasty that you can you deal with, but I also believe these locations sometimes attract some of the darker, the nastier sort of entities, whether they be human or other, that can come in and change things around a little bit and affect people, affect spirit, etc. So just because of what the places are and what what's the energy in there. So yeah, there's some nasty stuff. There's some some places that I've had some really nice experiences. But it's a really big mix of energies in there, good, bad, and other.
Well, it's funny you mentioned the dark energies because that's something else Kerry and I were talking about. And I was saying that, is it that when you get places like, you seem to get these very dark energies at asylums, sometimes at hospitals, at schools where there has been, say, abuse or something else. Now, are these dark energies just almost like, I know nobody will know the answer to this, but the opinions are interesting. Are these dark energies just a manifestation of all the nasty stuff that's happened at these places, and it's just that energy that manifests into like this thing of darkness? Or, and Kerry's view on it was that so many of these people, whether it be children, whether it be people who've got mental health problems, whether it be people who are weak because they're in hospital, they don't have, if you like, the normal barriers up to stop negative energies linking into them, so to speak. And is that why you get such a prevalence?
Personally, I mean, look, personally, I think it's a bit of A and B. If you know what I mean. All right. A bit of everything. It's a combination.
How's that fence that you're sitting on doing for you there, Bill?
It's doing awesome. But truly, I mean, it's as I said, I think sometimes, like for example, in the asylums, that what's gone on there, the energies that are there do attract things from outside. Yeah. The negatives, for want of a better word. But I think also sometimes what people have experienced or what they're what's gone through on their energies, the nasty, the darker, the whatever that they've experienced can manifest into something else. Even if it's even if it says like yourself being sensitive, for example, you walk into a place and you might not be actually attacked by a spirit as such, because of the emotions, the energy that's in there, you get affected. So you might become ill, you might become emotional, you might not be able to stay in there. It will drive you out. But that's not necessarily the spirit. That's the energies and the memories and everything else. Yeah. And if there's so much energy there, why there's a possibility that could create something that that is on the darker level. Right. So it's fascinating. There's so many different possibilities, and we just keep going out there trying to find out answers.
Yeah. Well, it's
as
what I
many
said.
others.
There was a debate going on one of the Facebook paranormal pages, and you had people sort of, if they didn't agree with a set, they're like, this is the right, this is the fact, this is the right thing. If you don't agree with this opinion, you're stupid.
Oh no, yeah,
I just put that everyone's opinion is valid. A debate is just
exactly.
that. Nobody can know. There are only certain things that you can know right from yes or no.
Sure,
The history
for
of a
sure.
place. You know,
Yep,
we're going to be talking
yep,
about this amazing part of Port Phillip shortly.
yes,
Fort
for sure.
Nepean. Is that right? Nepean. Did I
The
get it?
Nepean, that's correct.
Nepean, cool.
That's correct.
You know, we
Yep,
can say definitely that was built in 1873. It
yep,
fired shots, and we're going to talk about this bit because it's quite. I was telling my husband this bit of the history earlier, and he was quite
fantastic.
sort of blown away by it. So the
Yeah,
World War One side of things,
yep,
and all of that. Those are facts. We know those for
yeah,
definite. We can prove them.
for sure, for
We
sure.
can't prove what an evil entity is, whether it is one of the common things, a demon, or
Oh,
whether it is.
exactly.
I mean, you know,
Yeah,
knowledge and sort of opinion might one side or the other, and also depending on your religious bias as well, you might have an opinion one side or the other. Doesn't mean
exactly,
anyone is right or wrong. It's an opinion because
exactly,
it can't be proved, and no matter what people
exactly.
say, you know, if your opinion is
Yeah,
101% that evil thing is a demon, and
yeah,
yet
for
I'm
sure.
coming at you and saying, well, it can't be because demons don't manifest. Demons have
Yeah,
specific, if you believe in them, have specific reasons of to do what they're
exactly,
doing.
exactly.
It
And
doesn't mean either of you are wrong. It's an
no,
opinion.
it's all opinions. I mean,
Mm,
everything we do until we can, in some way, measure and capture and measure what we're experiencing and say, yes, well, this is,
mm,
this instrument does this and it's showing that this and this. It's not. I mean, we have, and we have all this gear, like, paranormal crews and groups and investigators have all this lovely gear that,
mm,
flashing lights, buzzing bells, cameras that catch different things, and that. But even with all that, we still got to not really have any clue
mm,
what these things are. We can have our opinions,
mm,
okay. For example, big debate is orbs. Okay,
mm.
orbs. Yeah, a lot of them on photos. Whatever they be. Like dust,
Yep.
bugs, moisture, light flares. Leakage. In the lenses. It could be
Fibers
anything.
across the lens that you can't
Fibers
see.
across the
Yeah.
lens. It could be any of those things. But there are some of these photos out there that might possibly be not them.
Mm,
Do you know what I
mm,
mean? They could be something anomalous.
yeah.
I mean, I've seen with my own eyes, not on camera, with my own eyes, I've seen orbs. I've seen
Mm,
them. I've had one come down and go between my legs and disappear into the ether.
mm,
I've seen another one, or several, in jails. Like,
mm,
for example, I saw one come out of a doorway or move down a hallway and go into another cell.
mm.
This is with my own eyes.
That's
You
with
know,
the naked eye.
so
It's not on a camera. So that
with
I would say
like,
those are the ones that yes, they seem to be. There's more
so
validation. Um,
for sure. So
I mean, the orb one
that's what
is a very that is one of the current hot potatoes, isn't it? And you
it
get
is.
people going,
It is.
oh, not another orb photo, and
Yeah,
99% of them, a photographic expert could explain away how that is just
exactly,
dust or
exactly.
moisture in the air or um, dog
Whatever.
dander, whatever it is. But
Yeah,
then there's the odd
exactly.
occasion, and this is what I've argued with people about, and I got called stupid basically by someone when I said this.
Lovely.
I got told if I still believed that gods were responsible for thunder and
Okay.
lightning. Yeah, he's off my
Lovely.
Christmas card list.
I
Um,
bet he is.
um, and I said to him that until science can recreate this, you can't
Yes,
say it's definitely not paranormal. I'm not
exactly.
saying every single orb because most of them you can
Oh,
say if you then
not
look around the front of the camera where it's illuminated, you can see the dust in front of the lens.
definitely.
Um,
And 99% are probably naturally occurring. But it's still that 1%, and that
yeah,
1% is what throws everything into doubt.
yeah. Well, one of the
Until we can.
experiences I had when I did Kelvedon and Hatch nuclear bunker, and
Yep.
my friend Kerry from Fright Nights London had taken a photo of me. She took a photo of me snuggled into
Yep.
my sleeping bag on the bunk. We were in the original bunks from when it was a nuclear bunker,
Yep.
and
Yep.
there was this what looked like white orb on the front of my sleeping bag. And I said,
Okay.
"Oh, it's going to be dust because it's my husband's sleeping bag. It's either a stain on there or dust. He uses it to go fishing in. It gets shoved in the shed when it's not being used.
Yep.
And she took another one straight away, nothing there.
Okay.
2 minutes later, I roll over to go to sleep, and someone squeezes my shoulder.
Okay, there you
Literally
go.
within 2 minutes.
Yep.
Now,
So
that to me would indicate maybe it wasn't dust.
exactly.
Because of the proximity of the activity. I can't
Well,
say
that's-
categorically. I know someone squeezed my shoulder because I wasn't asleep. I know it wasn't
Yeah.
my friend. I know it was nobody else because there was nobody else in. Well, her partner was in there, but he was fast asleep, snoring like a drain. She couldn't have done it because of how she
Yeah.
wasn't asleep and where the beds were in relation. She couldn't have reached over and done it.
For
But
sure.
somebody squeezed my shoulder.
There you go. It's a combination of things sometimes that prove, these sort of things. And, again, I believe everything comes down to, at the moment, because we can't prove them, scientifically, we come down to personal experience.
Yeah.
So, this is what I had happen, and this is, what I believe. I can't prove it scientifically, but these are the facts. That there was no one around in the area. Had a light anomaly just prior to, your shoulder being squeezed.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera. You go through these facts, and when you start to add them up, they start to look a little bit more
Possible.
Possible, is the word. Yeah. So,
I think my other bugbear though is when you get people putting what they think are orb photos on those Facebook pages, and people slam them, and they're really nasty to them and everything else. And this person thinks that they've got the spirit of their late nan, who they miss like crazy. And sometimes I think there's nicer ways of explaining to them how cameras this days work, and always caveat it with, but then again, I could be wrong. It could be your nan. If you feel that she was there with you, take it and run with it.
It's it. Quite possibly, exactly. People. Unfortunately, there's a lot of so-called experts out there that love to flex their authority or their supposed authority.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we deal with them all the time. But there's also good people out there, so that's what we try to deal with.
Yeah. No, it's a good. But to say that I think questioning things is a good thing to do. But there's a way of questioning or writing off, and they're two different things.
Oh, I agree. And
sorry, go on, Bill. Yeah.
No, I was going to say that my father used to say that it's how you speak to people, and you can get an experience across, to say no, this is I don't believe this is this, but it's how you say things, it's the words you use, it's the tone you use, it's you need a certain amount of empathy because there's people out there that are lost and are missing loved ones or whatever. You need to have a certain amount of empathy in what you say and how you say it. Yeah. So
and need something special to happen to them to make them feel like there's a point going on and all that kind of thing. And some of them don't like you explaining it to it, what it could be. Maybe it's not this, maybe it's that, and they get very upset, they get very angry with you, they get attack you. That's fine. But I do find, say the first time it was explained to me how modern cameras, digital and mobile phones, tend to throw up so many orbs. I found it quite interesting. And I thought, never thought of that. And it was just ironic that sort of later that evening was when we got the light anomaly on the front of my sleeping bag. But
it is. But you do have to question everything. You do have to question, any of your findings, anything you experience. You should question it and should look into try to find natural explanations. Because when you can't find anything, then again that's another point towards it being possibly paranormal. So that's
I was checking under the beds when someone squeezed my shoulder to check there was no one hiding.
Oh, really?
Yeah, okay. That's how far I went to check. It was because it was so definite, if that makes sense. It was so, and I wasn't asleep. I was still awake. So
you know what you felt.
Yeah, but I did check under a couple of the beds because the speed I moved and my eyes were still open, I would have seen someone go out the room or come in the room. So I thought maybe they're hiding to play a trick.
Yeah.
Nah, there was no one there.
No.
Apart from the two people I already knew about.
You know what you experienced, and that's to me that's a really big point. You know that it was a physical contact, and that's really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you weren't asleep, so that's another big point.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I still like the doppelganger story you told us about from Arrowdale. I find that one
Yeah,
quite
that's
freaky.
That's pretty full on.
Mm.
always sort of that. Yeah, still sits there and trying, in your mind, you're trying to work out what actually probably happened, but
or what would have happened if the person had followed the voice.
Yes, exactly. Well, anything could happen. That's the point. It's quite
so
creepy.
Interesting about it. Okay, well, let's go back nearer to home. Let's go back down, back a bit down south again to Melbourne. How close to you, where you are in Melbourne, is Port Phillip?
I'm probably Port Phillip's not that far. It's probably the bay itself is 25-minute drive away.
Okay.
Half an hour drive. And then you head off into different directions. But to get down to the Fort Nepean we're talking about, we're looking at about a 40-minute drive.
Okay. So is it classed as Melbourne?
Yeah.
Is it classed as Melbourne?
It's classed as a suburb of Melbourne, I would think.
So it's like Greater Melbourne almost.
Yeah.
Okay. And this port itself, is it quite big?
Yep.
Has it had quite a lot of use? Is it still used?
It's large. Yeah. We have Port Phillip leads into the Port of Melbourne, and shipping containers and tankers and all sorts of things coming in there. Mm-hmm. So it's quite a sheltered, but it's very large. I mean, it's not like a little bay. It's a very big bay, So really, it's the main sort of shipping channels for Melbourne. Yeah.
Okay.
Victoria.
Okay. And now we're going to be talking about Fort Nepean shortly, but you were saying to me earlier that's not the only fort that looks after this particular bay.
For sure. There was a whole defence system set up, and they weren't all at the same time. Some of them were in progress of being built, were never actually fully used. But there are forts that were manned. For example, we're talking about Fort Nepean on one point of the bay there. On the opposite point, we had Fort Queenscliff. Mm-hmm. There's the South Channel Fort, which is a little island in the bay. Mm-hmm. We've got Fort Pearce, which is not far from Point Nepean, which is just Fort Nepean, which is just back a little bit on the same peninsula there. Right. And a bunch of other places, Fort Franklin, Maggie's Nest, Popeye, Swan Island. They're all were either active or being constructed, but never actually got used. So it was a whole network of defence in that area. I mean, there was a big bit of paranoia about Melbourne being basically held to ransom or plundered, basically.
Oh, right, really?
In some cases. Yeah, definitely. So there's quite a big defence system.
This was the late 1800s. This was all built, wasn't it?
Yeah. The defence system was sort of they started really around, as you said, not 1873, but it sort of went through to 1880, 1877, sort of that main first lot of construction, and then bits and pieces there, and guns were moved from one fort to another, trying to get the best position. When you start talking about World War II, they were worried about air attacks, so they moved the guns to positions that were a little bit more hidden. Mm-hmm. So but there's the whole initial defence was to stop the basically anyone coming into the bay and attacking Melbourne or trying to rob or hold it to ransom.
Right.
So it's quite an interesting place.
So it was, according to the history stuff I read, if we focus on Fort Nepean now primarily.
Yep.
Say it was built in 1873, but it didn't get its guns embankments, whatever you'd call them, until about 13 years later.
Yeah, it was in the 1880s. They got the guns put in there, and there was I've actually got a list of the guns, but I haven't got it with me at the moment. So as they were put in, but it's an amazing place. It's the fort where it's situated. You're up on sort of the point of the peninsula there, and you're up quite high.
Yeah.
So you have a command and you can look all around. It's actually quite large. It's not a little fort. It's quite a lot of bunkers and constructions, gun emplacements, etc. To me, it's a fantastic place, even just a visit to have a look at, photograph.
Yeah.
But that whole area is a national park. So when you enter the national park, you're actually entering initially into the quarantine station, and then you've got and then what you need to do is there's actually shuttle buses, and it's about a 4-kilometre ride up this winding road up to the point where the fort is. Right. So it's quite isolated. So you can imagine, the soldiers, they probably felt, especially back then, they probably felt quite alone out there. Yeah. The ones. Yeah. Sure.
Well, just looking at the notes I'd made on the guns, you had part of the fact it was known as Victoria's Gibraltar, which I thought was quite interesting. You had 4 80-pounder rifled muzzle loading guns.
Yep.
In between 78 and 1980, and then you had 10 gun emplacements constructed between 86 and 90. And then by 1890, there were 4 6-inch breech-loading disappearing guns, 2 breech-loading 9.2 inches, Mark 5 and something breech-loading counter-bombardment British Armstrong guns, a 4.7-inch quick-firing gun, and a quick-firing 14-pounder.
Yeah, just a couple.
Just a few. I love the names of these things. Quarter pound, breech loading, and everything else. Yep. So that, and I did also read somewhere that when it was taken out of action in the 1960s or something, the guns were actually broken down for scrap and taken to a scrapyard, and people were so annoyed about this, they tracked the guns down to take them back.
Yeah. Oh, they did. Yeah, there was actually it was sent off to, I think, 2 scrapyards. One was, I think, military scrapyard, and the other one was just a standard scrapyard.
Right.
They did. They tracked the guns down, and because in both wars, supposedly Fort Nepean fired the first shot for the British Empire.
Yeah.
And both those guns are actually now at the fort themselves, so you can actually see. So they tracked them down, and they brought them, back to be, properly taken care of. Yeah.
Well, you say about the first shots. I was doing some research into that because you'd mentioned it to me as it was one of the things about the fort that was quite famous, and it's definitely the research I have done has said definitely was the first World War One. 5th of August 1914. It was definitely the first Australian shot of World War One, but apparently there was an HMS Lance in the UK that said they were the first shot, but theirs was at 10:30 a.m. Well, the shot that was over the bows of the SS Pfalz was at 3 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, which means the Aussies trumped us. You trumped us. You beat us.
It's one of those. It's I think it's one of those little rivalries, possibly too. But it's just So the German ship was trying to basically get the hell out of Dodge. Basically. When everything was falling down, they got the order to fire across the bow to try to stop them or sink them. So
it was quite interesting. Reading up on it. It was actually the guy who made the shot was a guy by the name of John Purdue, who was the bombardier who made that shot, and his family didn't even know about it until they found out subsequently that he had that accolade.
For sure. I was going to say, apparently, he was very staunch, like a very military man, pretty much all his life. The way he acted.
Yeah. But it's quite interesting to know that his family didn't have a clue about it. But what was even more interesting is that supposedly the commander at the fort had got the call saying we're at war just as the SS Pfalz was being guided out of the port by an Aussie pilot, Captain Montgomery Robinson. What a cool name, Montgomery Robinson. He was actually seeing the ship out of harbour.
That's correct, yes.
And then the shot got fired over the bow as a warning shot for them to stop. The German supposedly the German captain of the ship knew that they were at war. He'd already been told we're at war, sort of 12 hours previously. But he was trying to act like, no, nothing's happened. He didn't want to stop. He wanted to carry on going. Captain Robinson basically said, no, you carry on going. This ship's going down. And supposedly there was a bit of a fight between the two of them on the bridge.
Yeah, apparently there was a physical fight. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and he decided, better turn around. But the funny thing I found was that the ship was also full of dignitaries, like German people, members of the consulate there and everything were on board. So they obviously knew. They come and jumped on the boat and were heading home. So which is to me pretty amazing. But they were only about 10 minutes out away from being out to sea, so it was a pretty close call.
It was a close call. But yeah, the first shot, by the research I've done, it's the first Allied shot of World War One. Came from Melbourne.
Yep. There you go.
There you go.
So it's it's an interesting story. It is for being so far away from sort of Europe and all that to fire their first shot, which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, definitely. It's just shows you guys do like to get involved in stuff, don't you?
We don't mind a scrap.
Yeah, you don't mind a bit of a Barney. I know. But before we start talking about the haunted stuff that you've experienced at the fort, because I'm looking forward to hearing about that, because I've investigated a few forts here in the UK and I've had experiences, so it'd be interesting to know if there's any kind of parallels between the kind of thing that happens in another country. But reading up on the Australian involvement in World War One, which I don't think a lot of people always realise how much Australia did get involved in, kind of like to be there with the UK, and I talked about Gallipoli before you came on air, because that was an area that I genuinely didn't know that. I'd heard of it. That was about all I know about much. To be fair, I knew as much about that as I do about things like Anzac Day. But one of the great things about doing this show is I have an excuse to go and learn more about this stuff. But some of the stuff I found out recently was that the Australian Imperial Force, which was your World War One army, was volunteers, same as Kitchener's army, which was the UK, the man with the tash pointing to people saying, we need you, Kitchener. And out of something like a 5 million population in Australia in 1914, you had something like 417,000 men enlist.
Yes, it was huge.
Massive. Out of that, you had around over 60,000 killed, but then a further rough 160,000 who were wounded, gassed, or taken prisoner. So it was over half of the men who enlisted were either killed or injured or taken prisoner. That's massive.
It's huge for such a small amount of people in a nation.
Yeah.
It is. Like, we're pretty proud of our involvement, I suppose.
You're a feisty bunch, aren't you? For all this laid back, have a beer, put another shrimp on the barbie, all that jokes aside, you're quite a feisty little lot, aren't you?
Yeah, they're pretty tough. My wife's great grandfather, he was a light horseman in the war,
really?
and was at Beersheba, so which was the last proper cavalry charge ever, really.
Yeah.
Before they brought tanks in properly. They charged the Turkish trenches, and actually it's never been done before, to charge trenches with horses.
Yeah.
And so they're pretty gutsy. They were pretty gutsy. We're pretty proud of them.
Hey, well, you're right. It was the First World War that kind of saw the cavalry not being used anymore, because they realised that there was no point. It was a different type of warfare, and it was also where tanks started to be developed, and different time heavy artillery and all that kind of thing. And it was quite. It's the sad thing about these wars. They develop things that people now would think that's norm.
Yeah,
and it was trying to come up with ways of counteracting things. But you're right. It was the World War One was basically the end of the cavalry.
The horses. They say the cavalry become mechanized, so the armored vehicles, tanks, etc., replace the horses. So the armored vehicles now are our cavalry. So
well, I don't know how the army works in Australia, but I know in the UK. Those people who are part of the cavalry regiment in the UK, the household cavalry or whichever one, they're actually tank regiment. So they're all tank. They're trained on the tanks. That's what they do when they're not looking after the horses.
And that's sort of that replacement. So it's still the traditions continue, but the vehicles changed. Yeah. If you know what I mean. Yeah. So I find it's interesting the whole ceremonial and the way the military sort of they become modernized, but they still hold the old traditions. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely. But you're talking about traditions and customs and things. What I found quite amusing is I was reading some accounts from Australian soldiers in World War One who were slating the British soldiers. Firstly, because they were actually you Aussies were physically bigger than the British.
Okay.
Because you had, suppose it was something to do with the nutrition and how you've been brought up. The Australian soldiers tended to be a lot taller and a lot fitter, like more musculature and everything. They and also you had less customs and you didn't follow. Apparently there was an account I was reading. I don't know if I can find it while we're talking, but a British officer was getting very angry with an Australian for not saluting. Oh, here it is. It is. Why do you not salute? A British colonel demands of a slouching Australian private. And the Australian private, he said, to tell you the truth, digger, so we've cut it right out. And the British were absolutely appalled that the Australians didn't salute to their officers. And the Australians, the stuff I read was like, well, what's the point? What's it going to do for us? And I find that quite, and that's from an official military type website. I found that it's not a joke. It's not like from a Foster's advert or something. I find that quite funny.
I think the Australian attitudes are quite laid back. I mean, they do salute officers and things like that. But I suppose when they've been through what they've been through, they might have relaxed a little bit in their traditions there. You know what I mean? So, but the British, I know the British are very, very proper. Very, the officers there were quite sticking to tradition, and things like that. And that's to me that's good too. You know what I mean? Because it sort of shows in the face of adversity. You know what I mean? That you still have your ways, which is great. But the Aussie sort of attitude of should be right, mate. We'll work it out. It's all good. Sort of thing. That's quite that to me that's quite amusing as well. They're when they were quite hard fighters as well. So you can they were they really built a sort of a legend around themselves.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, if we look at Fort Nepean, you've been there a few times, I take it being local. Yeah.
Definitely. Yep.
How different is it after dark? Does it have a different vibe to it? Is it a comfortable place to be in? Is it an eerie place to be in? I don't just mean because it's dark, but you know what I mean. Does the vibe change?
I to be honest, to me, it's a really beautiful place during the day, and it still is beautiful during the night. Like it's a different. It's not like Arrowdale when the sun goes down. It does change the atmosphere completely. This does change, but it's not. To me, it's not. For want of a better word, it's not getting scary. It's not really that much more scary. It's not. It is eerie because during the day you have tourists walking around. You have a lot of people around. And when you're there at night, you're on your own basically. So it's quiet. So you've got these long arched corridors that are dead quiet. You've got these little rooms. You've got gun emplacements. You've got ammunition rooms and things that are just dead quiet. Apart from the ocean outside.
Yeah.
So there is that feeling of almost isolation more than anything for me. But overall, it's still a great place. It's still a beautiful place even at night. But more, I would say, isolation, a feeling of isolation rather than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, which is your favourite part of it?
Well, it's I like to be down in the tunnels, and we've had some interesting experiences down in there.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's as you said, history is outstanding. It's fantastic, but for me, you're combining the fort with, as I said, 4Ks away back down the track. You've got the quarantine station, so you've got all the energy coming from that, I believe, up to the fort as well. So, as far as I could find in my research, and there's not a lot to do with deaths and such. I can only find one death in the place, and to be honest, I can't even find details of what happened. But there's the history of that. Plus, there's the history, as I said, there's the quarantine station. So you've got all that energy coming up from there, and you've got the natural history. So you've got the Aboriginal history. You've got that sort of stuff there. Right near the fort, we had Prime Minister disappear. Harold Holt. He was swimming down at Cheviot Beach. Right. He was a really good swimmer and diver, and he used to swim down there all the time when it was pretty much military installation. Right. And he went missing. Just back, only probably like a K back from the fort. So he went missing there.
Do you have sharks around there?
Yeah, we do.
Right.
There was rumours of Russians taking him and things like that. So
okay.
So there's a really good story with that. But that's another thing. But all that around that fort, is really interesting.
Yeah.
But the fort itself it has a really I like the feeling of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
But that's me, but it is very, very isolated when you're up there on your own.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one second. I'm just going to reset the recording because, as you probably remember, we have to reset it every so often. So bear with me.
Sorry, mate.
That's all right. That's all right. Bear with me. Right. Thank you, everyone, for that. I just had to reset it so we can keep recording for you and talking to Bill about Fort Nepean. I must admit, I've investigated a few forts and wandered around them during the day as well as at night and everything. And I have never found any that I found particularly that I wouldn't want to be there on my own, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I find them quite sort of comfortable places to be. But none of these had ever really seen what I would call combat. They've been more there, a bit like this one, as a protection type of thing, as opposed to, they're not a fort that was in the middle of a battlefield kind of thing, which I guess would probably feel very, very different. But I know one of the forts I visited recently in the UK, Fort Horsted, it's a fascinating one because it's got loads of pencil graffiti on the whitewashed walls that the general public aren't allowed to see. Because you can imagine pencil graffiti in an old fort on whitewashed walls where it's crumbling. All it takes is brush your finger on it and it's gone.
Exactly.
I sort of managed, being a historian, I sweet-talked the manager of the place to take me up to see this graffiti, and it was fascinating because a lot of it was from World War One. And sort of writing comments home to family. One guy he absolutely hated women and was writing some quite nasty things about women, so I reckon he'd probably got dumped just before he went there. But this fort, I know, was used as a clearing centre before men were shipped off to the trenches.
Yep.
And obviously, I know that there was an awful lot of Australians got shipped to Egypt and then to Gallipoli in Turkey. Yep. I mean, you mentioned about your great.
My wife's great grandfather. Yeah,
great grandfather.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So. Do you know during World War One were men just literally stationed at this fort to protect?
Yeah, for sure. They were there to watch, basically watching 24 hours a day. It was a really uncomfortable place. It was really bad sanitation. There was it wasn't a nice place to be in. In the amenities. They were pretty much bored out of their mind most of the time. But they were too scared not to look, not to watch, or to fall asleep. Because if something come through and they missed it, then it's meant disaster.
Court martial job as well, probably.
also, what could happen once the ship got through. That was the big concern. They drank the water. The water was in a water tank, and what they would do is, so the mosquitoes didn't breed in this water, they would put a layer of kerosene on top.
Really?
Yeah. And they would drink from the water underneath. So you can imagine how uncomfortable it was. The food, for example, was shipped across from Fort Queenscliff every day. And if they couldn't get the ship there because of bad weather, they would have to trudge down to the quarantine station to get food. It was probably not the most comfortable place, but it was
probably more comfortable than being in the trenches.
Probably a little bit more comfortable than being in the trenches. See, the guys there. I mean, it was manned by they were soldiers, but they were not happy to be there. They were sort of felt like they were cowards almost.
Right. They weren't doing their part.
Yeah, not doing their part. They were staying back to watch out for this, for the port. They wanted to be out there fighting. Which was probably. I mean, look, probably not. They were probably lucky, what I mean, in the sense that they weren't in the trenches. But, the feeling was, we're just sitting here looking at nothing.
Yeah.
So, but it was manned. I'm not sure of the numbers, but it was manned by the Royal Australian Garrison Artillery.
Yeah.
And engineers, basically. And, they were there. So, and as I said, it wasn't very comfortable. So... And I can imagine during like a hot the heat, it would have been extremely bad. And in the middle of winter, because I've been there in the middle of winter, it's really cold.
You can't convince me Australia is cold in the winter.
Oh, yeah. Oh, it's cold for us.
Okay, cold for you. So I'd still be there in my shorts and T-shirt, probably.
Probably.
So during World War II, what was it used for?
Again, defence. It did fire the first shot in World War II as well. But this time it was actually firing at a Bass Strait. Well, in between Tasmania and Victoria and the mainland is Bass Strait, and there was freighters back and forth. The freighter Waniora, I think it's called Waniora.
I've got it written down somewhere. Yeah, it's the SS. Yeah, Waniora. Yeah, the SS Waniora, because she didn't identify herself, did she?
Yeah, she didn't. She was coming in and didn't identify herself, so they fired across her bow. So that was the first shot. We tend to, we're trying to get it in the lead all the time, I think. Getting first.
You try and beat us at rugby. You try and beat us in the wars. I mean, God, cricket.
Yeah, we're like the little brother that annoys everyone. So it was basically the same thing. So it was to protect the bay from invasion, or the port from being taken over.
Well, the big difference as well, probably compared to World War One, was you actually had anti-aircraft guns installed.
For sure. I mean, yes, there was more modern artillery, or more modernized artillery. They were probably a little bit more organized, and as such, in the way they did things there after the experience of World War One. In between, they still had that time in between the wars that they would, was basically manned as well, but not like during the wars.
Yeah.
It was constant, right up until 1945, the end of the war. So it had to be manned and had to be observed. So
you're saying you like the tunnels?
Yes.
You like the tunnels. Yeah. Why do you like the tunnels?
I just we seem to have had probably more experiences down in there. A lot of because it's so, the gun emplacements, a lot of them are open, and you have there's a lot of ocean noises, etc. So your recordings tend to get a little bit contaminated as such. It's probably a bit quieter down in the tunnels as well.
Yeah.
I mean, we've had different experiences. As I say, to me, it's probably not as active as I would like it to be, and it is active, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
For example, we've seen shadows moving around the tunnels. Not from us. We've heard banging. Again, you're pretty windy up there, but you try to track this banging noise and you can't hide it. We've heard voices. We've heard talking. and we're the only ones up there, so which is really interesting. And footsteps, like heavy, like military boots, if you know what I mean. That so we've heard them. But the biggest one was we actually had a camera set up, and it didn't catch it for some reason. It didn't catch it, but there was 4 of us that actually saw this happen. There was a black figure or a black shadow person, whatever you want to call it, with red eyes that actually was sticking its head around the corner and actually looking at us. And we could see it. But the camera didn't catch it. So, which was really interesting. We rushed up there and to where it was, and there was nothing there. So that was probably the most interesting thing out of the whole lot that I've seen. Okay. But little experiences, you hear things, you see things, you get, we have mediums with us as well, so they pick up things as well. But physically with our own eyes, that was probably the biggest thing that I've seen.
So that's the thing that really sticks with you, this figure, shadow with red eyes.
For sure. I mean, just back, if I can just step out of the fort for a minute, if you come back just a little bit, there's another fort just down the way a bit, heading back towards the quarantine station, which is called Fort Pierce.
Yeah.
And to me, it looks like a jail more than a fort. If you look, you can't physically get into it inside the actual part of the main building there. But you look inside there, and it looks like cells almost. So, it's which is really strange. And I had an investigator there. He went up and sort of was able to jump up on the roof there and get a little bit closer and have a bit of a look. And he actually come out, and he had his ear was all swollen up, and he had a big. And I said, "What happened?" He's a big fellow, 6'4", and he said something just punched me. So. That was interesting.
It was used as a sort of detention type.
Well, it may have been, but I can't find anything on that to say it was. So the thing is, with that, there is physical activity, and there are the things that you see. It's not just feelings and such. Yeah, which I find really interesting, and. Just more research, more investigating.
Definitely. Well, definitely. I mean, I know that fort I just mentioned, the one in Horsted. I know that was used to the men that were getting ready to go off to World War One. Because when I talked about Fort Horsted in my show that I did on it, there was this soldier that I found details of. He was a private who died almost at the very end of World War One. If he'd lived another 10 days, he would have made it out. But he kept breaching his leave conditions and coming back late, or coming back 3 or 4 days late, coming back at 7 o'clock when he should have been back at 6 o'clock. And I know they did have cells in this fort to keep people who were being disobedient, because you're going to get people being disobedient, whether it's military, whether it's at school, whether it's your day-to-day job. So you've got to have some way of punishing them. And I know when I went up to this part in Fort Horsted and chatting to the manager guy who knows the place intimately, and we were looking at some of the bits where he said, we believe this is where the anyone who was being in effect reprimanded would have been held. It was only short term, like a week or whatever it would have been. But he said this is where we think they were, because some of the writing teams seems to sort of be more legal based, almost. That's how I can describe it. So it wouldn't surprise me if a Nepean doesn't have that kind of facility there, that a neighbouring fort would have done, and would almost have been, if you like, the detention centre for all of the forts
in that sort of area. Yeah, no, I agree with you, and that's what my thoughts were. But it's very hard here to find sometimes from military records, things like that.
Right.
So I mean, you can find some stuff, but that's one I haven't been able to track down. So
what's that? Fort Pierce? Did you say?
Fort Pierce? Yes.
Pearce.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, as I said, there's a lot out on the internet about these forts as well. So anyone that's interested can jump on there and have a bit of a read. It's really interesting stuff.
It is.
And it's really a beautiful place. It's if you were here, for example, someone's over here for a visit, if you get someone to drive you, you can hire a car. You drive down there to the national park. You have a look around the quarantine station, which is a fantastic old place, right on the water, absolutely beautiful. Take the shuttle bus up. You see all the views. Get up to the fort, and the views from there are amazing. But apart from that, the history and the paranormal side of things, which interests us, and the history, it's great. It's a really, really great place. And,
but as you're saying, the paranormal stuff there is quite subtle. It's not as in your face, say, as at Arradale or whatever. It's a lot more subtle. It's a lot more, I suppose, business-like almost by the sounds of it.
Well, in some cases, yeah, it looks like they're still guarding the place in a lot of the places. I mean, as I said, I had that one strange one where there was, the shadow with the red eyes, but that was, that could be anything. It could be something that followed us. It could be anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But apart from that, everything else seemed to be quite, regimented, almost military. And the difference is, with the feeling, I believe, because it's a military fort, you're not dealing. It's a different feeling when you're in a jail or when you're in an asylum. There's a completely different feeling.
Yeah.
So very interesting. That a location, I find that a location can have such a different feeling.
Yeah. Maybe you should go back there on one of the anniversary of the first shots, say on the 5th of August.
Yeah, definitely.
See if anything sort of comes through almost.
Comes through. Well,
because the energy that must have been created on that particular day.
Oh, yeah.
From these guys thinking, hell, we've got to stop that German ship.
Exactly.
It must have been quite.
Would have been completely completely unsettling.
Action stations. Yeah.
Yeah. You would have, while we're into it, you know what I mean? Although then again, as I said, they felt like they were, out of the fight almost. So they they might have actually liked to have some action.
Yeah, probably. Probably. You should see if you should use John Purdue's name and see if you can.
Well, yeah. No, well, that's sort of, that's the plans of, different things we try to do is to try to, get to these locations, not just here but anywhere. And use names,
triggers,
anything triggers, anything that we can use to try to get some sort of reactions, which is
have you
which
used
is really...
triggers at Fort Nepean yet, or
I did a whole military sort of shouting at commands and things like this. So I was I don't know whether I mentioned I used to be in the martial arts. I used to teach martial arts a lot, and I used to teach a lot of military people, and they taught me as well. So excuse me. So the terminologies and such that they used may not have been exactly the same, but so I was using a lot of the shouting out orders like do this, do that, etc. We need this, we need that, to try to get some reactions. And as I said, there was boot steps, there was those sort of things. We heard voices in the distance and banging and seeing things moving, shadows and such. So they might have been following orders. I don't know. So it is an interesting place. It's a great place.
And the group that was down there investigating, was it just men or did you have women as well?
No, it was four of us. It was me, myself, and three investigators. One of the investigators was my daughter. She's been an investigator for a long time, but the others were all male. So we had a female as well, and it didn't seem to change too much. In the reactions, but she's a very experienced investigator, so she was watching and keeping an ear out, because we did talk about that female on base might have caused some sort of reactions, but it didn't seem to.
Interesting.
We're all sort of trying to look at different ways to try to get the reactions happening. Maybe if she was. And I didn't do this, and I only just thought of this just now, actually, to be honest. Maybe I should have got her to give the orders. And
that would be an interesting one. Or say something in German.
Yeah, well, that's right, exactly. So see what sort of reaction we would get. Now, I mean, she can speak Japanese, so it would have for World War II, that would be a good reaction.
That would definitely be for World War II a potential.
Yes. So we try to get some sort of reactions as best we can, but It's a great place. As I said, even just to visit and have a look around during the day, it's an amazing place. And And you know, the park is actually open 24 hours a day, so you just can't drive in there because they close the gates. You've got spikes, but if you're in there, you can drive out anytime.
Okay.
So I mean, although they don't really condone investigations as such, in the sense that you know, that you can't set up cameras in there in the quarantine station as such. The fort is open, so you can go. You know, you can do stuff at the fort.
So why don't they like you investigating the quarantine station?
Oh, it's to do with them wanting a family atmosphere and such. It's this is what we deal with here in Australia.
We have it here as well. I promise you.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
But the thing is, you know, I mean, they say, when I was trying to organise things there, they did say to me, "Look, the park is open 24 hours a day." That was there, so you know, it was sort of like, no, you can't do it, but it's open 24 hours a day, so you know, you can come in.
Yeah. No, we get it here a lot of places, like places where they hold weddings, like sort of really old homes and everything that you know full well has got something going on. They don't want anyone who wants to book a wedding there knowing that there's paranormal investigations going on, because obviously when you do paranormal investigations, you sort of bring the devil in, don't you? And you kind of raise people from the dead.
When we sacrifice goats and things, it tends to be a bit messy.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the blood gets everywhere. But you know, they feel that when you do paranormal stuff, some places feel that you actually cultivate activity as opposed to just monitor what's already there. Or they don't want families finding out that paranormal because it might affect their figures of people wanting to go there. My experience is, if a family doesn't believe in the paranormal, just because paranormal investigations have been done, ain't going to have any impact on whether they will visit a place or not.
And they're only there for a wedding. It's not like they're living there. You know what I mean?
No, I'm probably weird. I wouldn't mind having a wedding in a place that's haunted. I'd find it quite interesting.
That's what we do, don't we? So
exactly.
It's part of our life. So.
But then again, I also know you're not conjuring the devil when you do these investigations. It's a you know, it's not. We're not Alistair Crowley.
So you don't do that?
Pardon?
I said, so you don't do that? I'm just kidding. Just kidding.
Yeah, that's why I have trouble getting groups allow me to go with them. I keep sacrificing them all.
I know, it's terrible.
But no, we do have that similar problem here. Even though we've got all the hundreds and hundreds of years of history, we do have a lot of places that sort of like
don't
like the thought of it. And they don't see it as the money maker it could be for them. A lot of them,
exactly.
Because...
Well, I look at these locations and you know, they close at, you know, whatever time, 5 o'clock, and then between, you know, 5 o'clock in the afternoon and, you know, 10 o'clock the next morning, it's dead. You know, they could be running tours or having investigations, getting something done there where they're going to get more publicity, they're going to get more people coming through, they're going to make a little bit of money. You know, we look at things differently, I'm afraid, Penny.
I think we do. I mean, I'm quite chuffed that there's a place in Norwich that I suggested to one of the groups I know. She was looking for some new places in Norfolk, and I said you should try this place out. Don't know if they've ever done investigations, but the place itself is like 500-600 years old. It's a social history museum, so it's got artifacts in it from like the 1300s and on. So the chances of either the building having something going on or some of the artifacts being attached to and this place was, we never thought of that. That's quite a good idea. The investigation she's got booked there sold out within 4 weeks.
Fantastic.
I'm going to be going, of course, but things like that. So it was quite the museum group had never thought of it, and they're quite interested in to see how it goes.
Definitely, that's great.
I mean, I can understand with these sort of places they're worried about things getting damaged, and like this fort I mentioned that's got this pencil graffiti, people aren't allowed to where that graffiti is because it has been damaged in the past. I can understand that.
I can understand that. But a big part of what we do, if you're a proper group or proper team, you have respect. You have you treat these places with respect as you do the spirits that might possibly be there. You have a respect for history. You're not a bunch of larrikins that are just going there to drink some booze and muck around. You know what I mean? Or, play a game. It's for us. It's a serious thing. That we conduct what we do. So
I'll tell you something.
yeah,
I love the opportunity to go into these places that devoid of other people. There's like 20 of you in it, and you get to explore.
Oh yeah.
And it's dark, and there's everyone else who's there hopefully is of the same mindset as you, and
Exactly.
you get to explore. I mean, not all the places I go to do you get to let loose on your own, because I mean, not like this fort at Horsted, it was just
For
too
sure.
complicated. If people have got
Yeah.
lost, you can't hear them.
Well,
You can't hear
yeah,
them.
exactly.
But
And that's that's the thing. Sometimes you got to have boundaries. Sometimes I always say to even in Narradale, if you've never been there before, it's a rabbit warren. You will get lost. I mean, I've been there a lot of times, and I still get disorientated sometimes.
I'm tying myself to you if I get the chance to go there, Bill.
We'll tether each other.
You know those straps you put on small children so they don't wander off?
That's right, exactly.
Yeah.
We'll some of them, and tracking beacons.
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome.
I'm not getting lost in Arradale, not especially after the deadly spider and stuff being found on someone when they were doing a television show there. But no, I'm not getting lost. I'm tethering myself to you, or maybe one of your colleagues who knows the place intimately. I ain't wandering off on my own. Not because I'm scared of the ghosts or the spirits. I just don't want to get lost.
That's right. I understand.
Yeah, no, I don't want to get lost, thanks.
No, I can understand that.
The dark doesn't bother me. The spirits don't bother me. I just wouldn't particularly want to get lost.
Most of the time,
what would happen? You know what would happen? I'd be in Arradale, I'd be lost, and the husband would say to you, "I'll leave her. She'll be fine. Let's go home."
She'll be loving it. Oh, we wouldn't leave you behind.
You wouldn't. He would. Although actually, after the Haunted Australia program in Arradale, he said, "There's no way in heaven I'm ever going there." Okay.
You'll have to bring him along. Bring him along. I'll look after him.
Oh, yeah. Well, it depends if. Yeah. It would be
Not
good. It would be good. It would be good. It's definitely on my to-do list, my bucket list. But as ever, Bill, it has been a genuine pleasure talking to you again. I do enjoy our conversations. And we've only touched on the history side of things again. That's the thing.
Well, the thing is, there's so much you can talk about, and mate, I really like this. Is really fun. I have a great time talking to you, matey, and I hope your listeners enjoy. And
I think they will. Well, we got a lot of good feedback after Arradale, so I think this one will definitely go the same way. Awesome. I mean, it doesn't surprise me that the fort is less active than Arradale.
It's a way.
It's a different facility.
What's that? Sorry.
It's a different type of facility, so it doesn't surprise me. It's a lot more subtle.
And, some people try to build these things up, and they're storytellers, and trying to make things bigger than they are. I'll always tell you how it is. If there's nothing there, I'll tell you there's nothing there. You know what I mean? And I think that's what we need in this field. That sort of honesty. But it is still a great place, and it still has its activity. It's just different.
Well, next time you go and you take your daughter. Make sure she's the one barking out the instructions. And I want to know if anything else happens.
No worries. I will do that, definitely. And we'll as we said, we'll hit some of these more, what are they called? Anniversary dates too, I think are a good idea.
Definitely. I think that would be, that would be an interesting one to see, especially like the anniversary of them shooting at the SS Fault.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. To have the voice recorders, you're going to get some contamination, but what if we hear that gun go off?
A boom, yeah.
That would be awesome.
Wouldn't it just? Wouldn't it? That would be a pretty yeah.
That'd be very cool.
That would be a very good catch. I'm going to be texting you nearer to August to remind you that you said you'd do that.
You do that, mate. You do that because I'm always running at 120%. Busy, so any reminders I get are good.
Yeah, you just got to pop over there, whatever time in the morning it was. It happened. What was it? What time did I say it was? It was on the 5th. 10. No, it was 3 a.m. my time. So
it was 12:40. It actually says my notes actually tell me it's 12:45 p.m.
So lunchtime.
Lunchtime. So it's all right.
Yeah, that is about right. Because if it was 3 a.m. my time, 10 hours on, makes it roughly 1 o'clock.
Yeah, so just before 1.
Yeah,
definitely.
On the 5th of August. There you go.
We'll definitely do that.
We'll definitely do that. Well, like I say, it's been a genuine pleasure talking to you, as it always is, Bill. I do enjoy that. And you're going to be coming back again later in the year to talk to us about Melbourne?
Yeah, definitely.
The jail.
And it's always a pleasure speaking to you, Penny. You love our conversations, mate. And the jail's going to be awesome. I got some fantastic stuff from there for you.
Cool. Well, we'll get that one booked in. And say, if anyone wants to contact Bill, go onto the Australian Paranormal Society Facebook page, and you can drop him a line and say he's got his whole family into this. It's a family business, so
certainly is.
And you never know, he might even get his daughter to translate something into Japanese for you if you ask her nicely. There you go.
We'll have to try that.
But anyway, thanks everyone for listening to the show tonight. Don't forget, Parasearch Radio shows on every night of the week, and you can even catch them after the event if you go onto the Spreaker app and YouTube, believe it or not. But all that leaves me to say is thank you again for listening. Have a good evening, sleep tight, and don't worry too much about things that go bump in the night.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to join us for more shows throughout the week. Find us on Facebook, Twitter, and the World Wide Web to keep up to date with all the shows right here on Parasearch Radio.